On the eve of the wedding, I found a table on Clyde's computer. It was full of information about the girls he had been in love with. In my column, it said, "Be contented, suitable for marriage." And in the column for his first love, it said, "You are a bird, fly proudly to the distance." He said he would not marry her, because when his wife, she has to cook, raise children, serve her in-laws. He can't bear it. I didn't argue or make a scene. The next day, I went back to the TV station. Clyde didn't know it, but I also had a form. It was an application form for a transfer to Africa as a war correspondent. The man I truly loved was still there, and I would stop at nothing to reclaim him. You're going back to being a war correspondent. In the morning, a gasp suddenly burst from the TV station. I handed over the application form for the transfer. Yes, I want to go back to the DRC permanently. Nip, the stage manager, was half speechless. You're well suited to be a war correspondent, as everyone could see 3 years ago. But now, you're just getting ready to get married. People are still on wedding vacation. Would your husband even support you risking your life in a war zone? I was silent for a split second. No, not. What? I said firmly, at the shocked look in the station manager's eyes. Well, I'm not getting married this time. Yesterday, Clyde went to pick up wedding candy and asked me to send him a list of categories on his computer. I clicked on the form called Marriage Plan, only to find that inside was a record of his relationships, 6 girls, each with detailed records of height, appearance, and other information. My copy is on the first page. Name: Luna, family situation. No father or mother. Simple social relations, personality. Wife and mother type, peaceful and unmotivated remarks. Will do housework and can breed offspring. Finally, he marked yellow a few words, suitable for marriage. The heart drops in an instant. After a few seconds pause, I continued to scroll back. Several other girls, too, had similar comments. Extravagant spreading. Not considered. Laziness in life habits. Not considered. There's a younger brother. Not to be considered. But the last form, empty except for names and photos. Only the memo line reads, "You are a bird of prey," when proudly flying far away. Her name is Nina. I remembered that Clyde was a little hesitant about the name when it came to finalizing the guest list, repeatedly added and removed several times. When I asked him why, he said that the other guy was traveling around the world and probably wouldn't come back on purpose. It's my first love. It's a first love. Clyde's tweets are still hanging out on his computer. I found Nina. Their chats were deleted cleanly. But her latest circle of friends reads, "Abominable. The man I love is getting married, and I'm going to smash the axle of his wedding car to steal the wedding." Clyde replied back below, "There's no use grabbing it. I'm not marrying you." Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter. You found true love this time. What are you talking about, HMPH? Forget it. With a family as feudal as yours, marrying you means I have to serve your family, and I don't want to. My journey is to the stars and the sea. Well, I know. That's why I married who they wanted me to marry. I can't afford for you to do this either. Can't give it up. That's a pretty rare word coming from Clyde. Clyde and I met on a blind date. He is young and talented, the youngest associate chief physician in a tertiary care hospital, and handsome in appearance. But because Force had a pair of traditionally difficult parents, he was never able to get married. They are controlling and demand that their daughters-in-law be well-behaved and docile, have work in their eyes, and can serve. The first time I came home with Clyde, his mother brought a basin of water and asked me to wash her feet, but I'm willing to live with that. Because the first sight of Clyde, I was like, I'll do anything for this face. We were in love for 2 years. His parents are very happy with me. And he grew accustomed to a home that was always clean and tidy. Hot soup and hot dishes that were always ready. Clothes that were always pressed and straightened. But the attitude has been unsavory until his birthday this year, when I wanted to make him a cake with my own hands. Turns out the oven exploded while preheating. When he arrived at the hospital, he saw my arm covered in shards of glass. Only for the first time did I lose my temper a little, cupping my face in panic, my voice trembling. You don't have to do this for me. It's okay if you don't. But even then, he never said that he couldn't give it up. Later, he proposed to me. I had thought that he was probably willing to go on with me out of a bit of truth, but I didn't realize that he was only doing it to fulfill his parents' wishes. Nina, the one he cherishes so much that he'd rather let go. The moment you see them conversing, I was like, it's time for this relationship to end. He does theater for his parents. I do theater for myself. But acting is ultimately theater. When I got home from the TV station, I rummaged through the depths of my bookcase and pulled out a couple of camera bags. That's an old memory I've buried deep. The camera casing has all become unfamiliar to the touch, and the batteries have long since dried up, waiting for the seat charger to recharge for the duration. I inserted the memory card into my computer and opened the dusty photos. The first, a black woman waiting in the street to distribute cholera pills. The second, a 5-year-old child soldier not as tall as a gun in the third. Refugees from North Kivu living in broken tents. The smell of smoke and dust traveled through time and space. The heart felt like it was being clutched by a pair of sharp claws. I leaned back in my chair, calming my spiking heart rate, and smiled a little to myself. And I don't know if Clyde sees these things. Will there still be the words peacefully in my notes column as he was thinking about it? His cell phone vibrated twice. It's his message. He sent a restaurant location. It just occurred to me that he had invited the bridesmaids and groomsmen to join him for a little get-together in the evening. I don't have a lot of family or friends, so they're all Clyde's friends. But it was clear to me that it was just an excuse to feast, because today, Nina is back in the country. When I got to the restaurant, they finished ordering next door to Clyde. Sits Nina, there's no place for me. And Nina saw me and spared a glance, then command defined. Go ahead and move a chair. Make yourself comfortable. I sat the farthest away from them during that time, Clyde just watched everything blandly, not a word. Someone snapped, "Jojo, we thought you weren't coming back this time. Are you kidding me? This is King getting married. I just have to crawl back here to see what kind of goods he's found." Several people exchanged meaningful glances. That's true. You two are not close. After that, they started asking Nina about what she had seen along the way. By the time the food came, she had finished telling stories about fishing for yellowfin tuna in the Mediterranean, hiking the pilgrimage route in Portugal, and climbing Uluru Boulder in Australia. Those people's eyes were glowing. "Jojo, you're a girl. How dare you go to so many places? HMPH, I'm not the kind of woman who only has a faggy husband and kids in her eyes. The brave enjoy the world first." Between the drinks, she was the center of attention in the crowd, and Clyde sat next to her, rarely interrupting. Only now and then did he incline his head to look at her with eyes that grew so tender they were dripping with water. I finished half a goblet of white wine in silence. The tongue is spicy and bitter, feeling that everything is tasteless. Nina has already told the story of her recent run around with scammers in Egypt. She turned her head suddenly and asked Clyde, "You want to know how to say dear in Arabic?" Clyde gave a start and shook his head. "I'll teach you." Nina leaned over his shoulder and blew into his ear. "Habibi Tilda," Clyde helplessly righted her as her earlobes turned pink. "You sit down. You learn from me." Can't help Nina making a scene. He sighed and spoke in resignation. "Habibi. Bingo. That's right. You're my harpy Tilda." Her eyes rolled, and she suddenly looked at me again. "Have you ever been to Africa?" Someone immediately snickered. "Does she look like that to you?" And Africa, out of the provinces are less, right? Even Clyde had a sneer on his face and shook his head. Nina narrowed her eyes and got a triumphant look on her face. "That's true. I asked the wrong person." "Ask her." "You should ask which nearby food market has the cheapest food and which brand of toilet bowl cleaner is the best." The table erupted in laughter. She turned her head away and moved on to the next topic. I slowly clenched my fists. I'm a little drunk too, I think. How else could you be outraged by such a poorly executed provocation? "I've been there," I whispered. The voices at the table dropped a few notches. Nina cocked her head. "What?" "I've been to Africa." A flash of shock crossed her face, but then quickly dismissive. "Ouch. There's no need to be so vain, right? If you haven't been there, you haven't been there. It's not good to lie. It's easy to get caught." "I'm not lying. So tell me, where did you go? Kenya? Morocco? Could it be South Africa?" She held her head high, like she was sure I couldn't answer. I stared at her. DRC. The air was suddenly quiet. "Where?" "The DRC." "Where?" "Too drunk to blow this kind of thing, haha. What sane person would go there?" Poor and messy place. The fire in his heart grew a little brighter. "There's a lot of people there besides me. Médecins Sans Frontières, the peacekeeping force, the reconstruction team. Is everyone not normal? Not only have I been there, I've been there for a whole year. I've seen them fight wars over mineral resources, been to Ebola treatment centers, distributed relief food with UN staff. And I got shot The scene was dead silent. Everyone's mouths were open. And, Jay, I shook the glass in my hand. There are no yellowfin tuna in the Mediterranean because they prefer tropical waters. The pilgrimage route isn't in Portugal. It's from France to Spain. And the Uluru boulder was even banned from climbing 19 years ago. I narrowed my eyes. Nina, it's not nice to lie. It's easy to break. Her face was instantly pale. The puzzled and bewildered eyes of the crowd swept between us. Nina rose prancing, coloring. How could she, a fatherless thing, have been to those places? She's the one who's lying. I grinned with a pestle. So why don't you show the picture? After all those trips, you have to take a few pictures. Right, it can't be nothing. Can it? Growing more and more flustered, she turned to Clyde. Ching, what's wrong with your wife? Isn't today my reception banquet? Why did you let her bully me like this? Never mind, since I'm so unwelcome, I'll just go with that. She wiped her eyes and actually ran out. The scene was a riot. The others are anxious to push Clyde, go after them. It's nighttime. What if you get lost? Clyde's face darkened. He gave me a hard stare and sprinted out the door. Others have also left the table. Sister-in-law, we'll leave first. Someone lowered their voice. How does she have the nerve to target JoJo's like that? Doesn't she realize she's the mistress trying to steal the bride's spotlight? Jealousy. Nina is beautiful and insightful. What does she have? She embarrasses JoJo. But in the end, it's her husband who coaxes. But it's stupid. They sneered and walked away. I was the only one left in the large box in a few moments. I let out a silent snort, poured himself another glass of wine. Tilt your head back and finish. Actually, Nina wasn't wrong. I really haven't been to any of those places. But the reason why you know she's lying, it's because of my mom. I wasn't born without a father or a mother. She was an international journalist who later began to be based in war zones. In those days, it was anathema for a woman to work abroad and for a man to raise his children in his hometown. The neighbors always taunt me. Your mom doesn't want you. I balled up my fists and punched them, ferociously defending my dignity as a child, only to be mocked even more mercilessly when I was a kid. It was hard to see her once, but she often sent letters with postmarks from all over the world, write about her life in the area in great detail, with photos. The greatest joy of my childhood was sitting on my dad's lap and listening to him read letters, then mentally conjure up an image of that spirited female reporter, she said. Glistening. Most women's world is small, but the real world is big when you grow up. You have to come and see it for yourself. See a lot of things, so you can know what you want. She's my eyes. At an age when you haven't even read a few books, it was through her that I caught a glimpse of the world. But when I was 5 years old, she died in the line of duty, killed for exposing the massacre of civilians by the army in the Kosovo War. The newspaper only recovered her camera. It contained nothing but precious video footage that she was sworn to protect. There's another picture of me taken at some point in time. At the time, I didn't quite understand what murdered meant, but those who used to love chewing on my doorstep gloated See, women who are too much of a show-off don't end well. After that, I was left without my mom, but always remembered her exhortations. Go see and document the world for yourself. That's how you know what you want. Of the cameras I turned out this afternoon, the one with the oldest and most mottled color was hers. The heat was getting to my head, and I was dizzy, burying his face in his palm. Mom, I miss you so much. The next morning, I woke up with a headache, tearing his eyelids open. He was confused for a while, before realizing that the ceiling above his head was the ceiling of his home. Yesterday, don't even know how I got up, and went to pour a glass of warm water. Clyde sat in the living room, grimacing. Is that how you act as a hostess? Didn't want to pay any attention to him at all. I turned toward the den. However, the table was empty. I asked hoarsely, "Where's my camera?" I gave it to Nina. I jerked around. He clasped his arms in disbelief. Weren't you the one who told her to take 2 more pictures? Brain struggled to comprehend every word that came out of Clyde's mouth. He, took my mom's camera and gave it to Nina. I suddenly smashed my water glass, grabbed him by the collar. How dare you touch my camera? How dare you? Clyde was taken aback. Where's Nina now? Luna, let go. Where is she? I tore at his collar hysterically. All the wine that he had drunk last night was now fighting its way out of his eyes. Clyde was suddenly struck dumb. At the Union Hotel, room number 1103, I pushed him away and grabbed the door, drive and kill to the hotel. I ran straight up to the 11th floor and kicked in the door. Get out. After a while, Nina angrily opened the door. What's gotten into you this early in the morning? I rushed in. Sure enough, the camera was sitting on the TV stand in the room. I picked it up and went to leave, but Nina pulled me back. This is something Clyde gave me. Who are you to take it back? I turned and slapped her across the face. It's mine. Who are you to bring it? She was blindsided by me. It took half a second to scream. Don't you dare hit me. She tore up and came up, crying and scratching. You bitch. You've already robbed him of his people. Now you're going to steal even what he gave me. In the scuffle, the fragile camera strap is ripped off by Nina. She grabbed the fuselage and slammed it hard into the ground. A loud zoo. My mind went blank for a moment. The camera just shattered into pieces in front of me. Nina's eyes were cruelly smug. What I can't get, you can't get. A tsunami of despair and anger hit. I grabbed Nina's head and slammed it against the wall with all the strength I could muster. Just one click, and she bled. She screamed. Help. Murder. The door to the hotel room was jerked open. Clyde rushed in. His eyes widened at the sight of Nina's misery, pressed me against the wall. Luna, you're crazy. Nina trembled behind her back, rubbing her forehead, her legs shaking so much she couldn't stand. Ching, I'm so scared. I pushed him away and fell to my knees. With trembling hands, he put the pieces together in vain. You don't care if your fingertips get cut by glass, but how you spell it. It's not right. Clyde grabbed my hand as soon as he could. You calm down. It's all broken. It won't fit together. I shuddered violently, silent tears falling down my face. He gritted his teeth. It's just a broken camera. Just buy another one. Are you as crazy as that? I bit my lip. The taste of blood overflowed the mouth. A broken camera. It was the only thing my mom had left. And he said it was just a broken camera. I looked up, having a hard time containing my monstrous hatred. Slap Clyde hard across the face. .1 blood from his fingertips brushed against his face. Clyde, get out. You get out. In his horrified gaze, I took off the engagement ring on my hand, throw it hard into the trash. I emptied my stuff and went back home. Go see Mom. Sit in front of the headstone for the rest of the day. Clyde called me numerous times during that time. I didn't answer it. I blacked him out. Sometimes I feel groundless. Would Mom be disappointed if she saw what I've become these past few years? I failed her and didn't grow up to be a proud, brave, strong person. Instead, she wasted 3 years with a man who didn't deserve it. On the 3rd day, I went to the cemetery as usual, but suddenly, next to the tombstone, he saw something unexpected. It was a pot of bird of paradise. The heart began to beat wildly. It's Mom's favorite flower. Who was here? I turned and ran to the cemetery office and asked. They told me that every couple of months, someone would deliver it, and then gave me an address. There was an answer in my mind, but I was afraid to believe it. Following the address, I found a flower store. Take it from the store owner. About 3 years ago, she got an order. It is hoped that a pot of bird of paradise can be placed at Miss Dai Q Yun's grave every 3 months. She was impressed because the other party gave the full 3 years at once. My heart almost flew out of my throat. Do you guys know who this guy is? The shopkeeper flipped through the records. His last name is Key, Mr. River. But we haven't been able to get in touch with him for a long time. There was a supply problem for a while, and we tried to ask if we could send other flowers, but he never replied. Do you know him? The shopkeeper looked up at me, but his expression suddenly panicked. Ma'am, are you okay? I rubbed my sore eyes and waved my hand. I'm fine. The owner was very understanding. She handed me a packet of tissues and made me a cup of flower tea. Then he turned around and went to wake up the flowers. I calmed down in the store for a long time before finally picking out a small bouquet of daisies and getting ready to leave. When I was about to pay, the store owner suddenly stopped me. You don't have to pay for this bouquet. I'm a little bewildered. She gave a look of reminiscence. Ma'am, as I recall, Mr. G also said at that time that someone might come in later and ask for this order. If she came alone, send her a bouquet of flowers. Tell her, go forward and the stars will light the way ahead. That day, I cried uncontrollably at my mom's grave. I didn't think that he would show up in this way. What's more, I didn't realize that by now, I'd actually have to rely on him for comfort. What kind of mental preparation did he do to leave the store owner with that? I'm the only one who understands what, if she came alone, means he's not with me anymore. A coworker called me in the evening. Nip, the tickets are booked for next week. Who are you going to put as the beneficiary of this life insurance? Your husband. I shook my head. Please fill in Madison's sans frontières for me. Doctors Without Borders. Uh-huh. What made you think of filling this out? I sniffled because, well, he's a MSF doctor. Staggering out of the cemetery gate, I saw an unexpected figure. It's Clyde. He was bearded and a little haggard, saw me. Didn't say anything, just handed over a box. Inside lay a camera, the same model as Mom's. The original one. It just couldn't be fixed. We stared at each other in silence. I don't know how he found me, not to mention, I don't know where he found this 94 release camera again. But what I hold dear is broken. What's the point of even getting another one exactly like it? He saw that I wasn't answering and pressed his head a little wearily. Come back with me. The wedding is next week. The invitations have been sent out. And if we make any more trouble, we won't be able to get it over with. I find the irony. In your opinion, am I the one making a scene? He sighed and took my hand. Luna, I know you're doing this because you love me and think I'm favoring her by giving her what's yours. But that's because she had to make you pay for it. And I gave her that camera because I saw how old it was and told her to stop messing with you. You embarrassed her in front of all those people. I couldn't just ignore it. I suddenly felt a twinge of pity for the person in front of me. Clyde, I don't love you. He froze and went cold again. Don't talk tough. If you don't love me, why do you always look at looking with that look? I laughed softly and drew my hand back, touching his face greedily. What a shame. I'll never see this face again. Like a sudden realization, his face changed abruptly. You. However, his cell phone suddenly rang. It's Nina on the phone. He hesitated for a few seconds, but answered. The opposite tone was disoriented. Ching, I have to go. I'm sorry for the trouble this time. I just can't really stop being jealous of her. Jojo, where are you? You don't come, you go to her. She's the one you're going to be with for the rest of your life in the future. Clyde's voice changed in his haste. Nina. The phone hung up. Clyde shoves a handful of stuff into my arms and turns his head in a frenzy. I watched the figure disappear at the end of the street. Cold smile, raising his hand, he tossed the camera into the trash can. I'm almost gone too. You don't have to bring anything that doesn't work, right? The next week was a busy one for me getting in shape, familiarizing yourself with the language, identifying a topic, contacting a local guide. During that time, Clyde changed numbers and texted me. Nye Zion, what did you mean that day? Don't we have something else to talk about? I apologize on Nina's behalf for what happened the other day. Where are you now? I haven't replied to a single one. The day before he left, he asked again. The wedding is tomorrow. You'll be there, won't you? I broke the calling card. Dragging my suitcase, I headed to the airport without a second thought. The plane took off as the morning light streamed through the porthole. There are no direct flights from Beijing to Kinshasa, the capital of the DRC, to change planes in Cairo. The whole thing was nearly 20 hours, enough for me to relive old dreams. I put on the blindfold the flight attendant had issued, softly murmuring, River, I'm coming back. I really missed you. I first met River in a refugee camp in Goma At that time, the situation in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of the Congo was very chaotic. Militants have attacked villages for seizing mineral resources, ethnic tensions, etc. Hundreds of thousands of people have been forced to leave their homes and seek refuge in major cities. When I arrived at the refugee camp, several doctors were treating a little girl. She had a small stone stuck in her ear from the explosion. The little girl kept struggling, making it too easy for the doctors to pull it out. Then someone shouted, "Key." An Asian man approached. After checking the situation, he even pulled out a few cards from his lab coat and did magic on the spot. The little girl was captivated, so the doctor next to him did it immediately when the stone fell into the iron plate with a crash. The cards in the man's hand also disappeared. In its place, an African violet. The little girl's eyes rolled back in her head, started picking at his sleeve, but ultimately found nothing. So she clapped happily, tugging at the hem of her parents' clothes and screaming. The man handed the flowers to the little girl and sent the desperately grateful adults out of the medical tent again. I lifted my camera and captured this peculiar scene. The sound of the shutter made him turn his head. A little surprised to see me in French, he asked, "You don't see many Asian faces here. Where are you from?" I said, "China." With a surprised look on his face, he switched back to Chinese, told me his name was River, and that he was a MSF doctor currently stationed in Goma. Thinking about the scene earlier, I asked, "Where did you find the flowers?" After all, flowers, as such, are less common in refugee camps. He was a little smug. "I've planted a lot of them. Do you want to see them?" I followed to his dormitory. He was found to have created a small garden out of found foam boxes, plastic bottles, and broken tiles. There are the African violets we just saw, as well as larkspur, tropical orchids, and Congo azaleas. I'm confused. "Why did you plant these?" He threw his legs over the table, his tone matter of fact. "Because flowers make people happy." I only wondered. Instead, he laughed. "I know what you're thinking. Do you think that food, drinking water, and medicine are more pressing for them, and that flowers are more important too?" I nodded. He said, "Here, everything forces one to forget the good, but being happy makes one remember that one is still alive. It is worthwhile to look forward to something else. With anticipation comes hope." The corners of his lips lifted, and he winked at me. "So, flowers are important too." The strings of the heart were gently plucked. I looked at this overly optimistic and enthusiastic and scatterbrained man. For a moment, there was some inability to move his eyes. River and I are the only two Chinese in the whole camp, so we became natural allies, a little different from first impressions. River is actually extremely serious about his work. He provided me with a great deal of detail on casualties, shortages of supplies, and I bring those numbers and stories together into reports that go viral. My first story secured a shipment of nearly 1,000 tons of food donations for the area. At that time, River noticed an unusual AIDS mortality rate in the camp. We've been distributing anti-AIDS drugs, but they're still dying in droves. It doesn't make sense unless they didn't take their medication at all. I looked through the records of those patients and said, I'll check then. I traveled around and eventually found out that not only the anti-AIDS drugs, but almost all of the free drugs distributed went to the black market. All the drug dealers need is a bag of moldy cornmeal for those life-saving pills. Back, because that could be the next month's rations for the refugees and their families. The report was issued and caused a furor in the international media. The United Nations World Food Program, WFP, quickly deployed supplies. The day the aid convoy arrived, there were cheers in the camp like never before. We were sweating profusely as we helped to distribute the relief food, but our hearts were overwhelmed with joy. After handing the last bag of potatoes to a mother with a baby in her arms, River and I collapsed against the side of the truck. He turned his head to me. The smile lit up the whole face and set off that handsome face even more glitteringly. Luna, thank you. Thank me for something. Before you came, all I could do was watch them get stuck in a rut. And there was very little I could do. But now, I see in you what I am meant to be. You showed the world them, and us. My heart was beating like a drum in that moment, barely able to breathe properly. Flustered, she fiddled with the hair at her temples, trying to cover her gradually reddening ears. From there, we flew to get acquainted. River is very popular. He is an excellent healer and extremely dependable in a pinch. Also funny and always making the others laugh. I enjoyed spending time with him. Even my interviewees were willing to talk more when he was present. One day, I followed him as he sprayed the camp with alcohol to combat cholera. Suddenly, a cry for help came from the vacant tent. Lifting the curtain, a man was on top of a girl, tearing at her clothes. I instantly went cold and rushed over to push him away. He cursed angrily and swung his fist. River pulled me behind him as he held up the work badge on his chest. If you don't want no one to see you in the future, you'd better leave now. The man looked at the red cross on it. Cursing, he pulled up his pants and fled. We took the girls to the UNHCR office and asked for help in relocating them to other tents. When it was all done, River tapped me on the shoulder. Don't feel bad. You've done a great job. Jay, I was stunned. I'm not sad. Refugee camps have likewise always been accompanied by violent crime, something I have known for a long time. But he cocked his head. But you just look so sad. I froze, raising his hand. He touched his face. He suddenly laughed, reaching up. He pinched my cheeks hard. One's mood is not just written on one's face. It was like he had found a new joy. Every time we met after that, he watched for a few seconds and then said, "In a good mood today?" Or, "Who pissed you off?" I was helpless and amused, couldn't help but ask, "How in the world did you see that?" He rested his hands behind his head. "I have a brother, and in some ways you are. Somewhat similar. Both like to keep their emotions inside." At the mention of my family, I was silent. "Doesn't your family worry about you when you're here?" He shook his head flatly. We broke it off. Why? I was a little shocked. Because I don't want to listen to them. They were horribly controlling, and from an early age, they forced me to do this and that. And if I dared to contradict a word, it was a severe beating. I listened to them and studied medicine and got into the hospital, but they weren't satisfied yet and pushed me to keep working my way up the ladder, to make a name for myself and earn them face. I don't want to go on like this. I just want to do pure things. MSF has returned to the essence of being a doctor and saving lives. And I love that, he sighed. Alas, in that case, I'm still a little sorry for my brother. They had him when I was disobedient as a child, just in case they had a trumpet to start over with if I wasted away. When I ran out, he was forced into my old ways. As obedient as he is, I know that he is also depressed. I heard that he then fell in love with a very jumpy girl, but they stirred that up too. The first time I heard him mention his family, I didn't realize it would be so saddening. We looked at each other for a moment. He asked, "What about you? What brought you here as a war correspondent? Doesn't your family worry?" Maybe it's because he shared his family's past honestly first. I then didn't find it so hard to talk about it either. I hesitated and said, "My mom died, and Dad broke it off, just like you did. That year, Mom had her funeral. There were a lot of people coming, a black mass. The MC spoke a long eulogy. I couldn't understand all of it and wandered off in the middle of it. A butterfly flew into the hearth and rested on Mom's effigy. The way it flapped its wings made that photo seem to come to life. I watched my mom smile at me and smiled along with her. The next moment, slapped to the ground by Dad, he growled, 'Your mom is dead. How can you still laugh?' Everyone looked at me as if I was a monster. I wailed. He slapped me again. I'm not even crying yet. Why are you crying? Cry again, and I'll throw you out. Don't want you." At that moment, I was so scared, with tears in her eyes, she bit her lip, not daring to say another word. The first year after Mom died, Dad used to sit in the living room in the middle of the night and look through the letters and photos. The next year, he packed his mom's stuff into a couple of cardboard boxes and piled them into the corner to collect dust. In the third year, he remarried, that new aunt, throwing cardboard boxes into the yard to be burned clean in a fire. I desperately plowed out the camera, shielding it in my arms for dear life, burning a patch of my body. That's all that's left of Mom since then. Then later, a sister was born. The love and energy of the whole family went to her. I grew up in the house like an invisible man. Until I was 18, went to college, and majored in journalism. On the day of the report, my dad took out a thick pile of money and threw it at me. "You're old enough not to come back later." I counted 30,000. For 30,000 bucks, it buys out our blood. When I went to college, my teachers and classmates said I was well suited to be a journalist, because no matter what event I encounter, I can keep my face intact. This became even more of an advantage after I started working as a war correspondent. They all admired my mental toughness, but only I know that I was afraid to. I feel in my heart of hearts that if I hadn't pissed off my dad in the hearth that day, wouldn't he just not want me? I'm used to suppressing all my emotions. I can't imagine if I were to relax and laugh and shed another tear. There's something else to lose. With that said, I exhaled softly. These things have been pressed inside for years, and it's the first time I've confided in someone. River's frown deepens. The corners of his mouth, usually always smiling, collapsed. He sounded serious. Luna, have you forgotten that you were a 5-year-old? I was a little confused. What, crying and laughing, is a child's prerogative? You're desperately trying to suppress yourself simply because, well, you've never been allowed to be a child. I froze. It was as if he had been hit on the head with a dull stick. So that's it. Dad didn't speak to me for a long time after the funeral. Then my sister was born. And again, my needs always took a back seat to hers. When I go to college, I'm going to finish school, and more importantly, I'm going to support myself. There really wasn't, it seems, much of a moment of being cared for as a child, because there is no one to rely on. One knows that one's cries and laughs will not be answered. Might as well hide it in your heart. I hung my head, a little bitter. Yeah, but it's also grown up now, much less like a child. Laugh all you want, cry all you want. Suddenly, the ribs felt like they were overcharged. A tingling sensation leapt up. I was so shocked that I leaked out a strangled yelp. I turned my head to look. Surprisingly, it was River who poked me in the waist. He hooked a playful smile. Who says it's impossible? I flinch back desperately, but he catches me. It's like there's a switch on the side of the waist. Despite my best efforts to strain my mouth, I was still grinning madly like a leaky balloon. Stop. Stop poking. It tickles. Ha 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 ha. Please. I broke free and was cornered by him again. Laughed so hard tears came to my eyes, wailing and pleading. Leave me alone, Dr. Key. He showed his teeth and extended his claws towards me again. I scrunched up into a ball, only to realize that the imagined soreness and numbness hadn't happened. Quietly, he opened his eyes a crack. I saw him spread his palms toward me in the palm of your hand. There's a candy, he said with a smirk. Here, a reward for the little ones. I stayed for half a day, disengaged. He fell to the ground, peeled off the candy paper, and popped the candy into my mouth. It's not good. The bad fruit flavoring spreads out and is cloyingly sweet, but it burned my eyes to a crisp. River leaned down and pulled me up into his arms. Cry, it's okay. I know you're upset. The warm, strong hug completely broke down my last line of defense. How long has it been since this feeling of being understood and cherished has been felt? Long enough for me to think that I didn't deserve it at all. Yet, in this foreign land, halfway across the world, instead, he coaxed me like a child with a piece of fruit candy. I couldn't hold back any longer. The tears that were held back raw at the age of 5 finally came out in full force more than 20 years later. He kept patting my back gently, letting his clothes get soaked from the beating. By the end of the day, I don't know when, but I was crying myself to sleep in his arms. Woke up the next morning. My eyes are swollen like walnuts, and I'm still wrapped around River like an octopus. Thinking about last night's scene, I dangled on the spot, rolled over, and tried to run. He ended up reaching out and whooping him. Run for what? I buried myself under the covers and hummed randomly, and he's acting like it's nothing. Are you shy? What's there to be embarrassed about? He dug me out from under the covers, smiling. From now on, you can cry if you want to, and laugh if you want to. If anyone doesn't allow it, I'll beat him up for you. I shook my head frantically. He raised an eyebrow. You didn't get it. I was confused for a moment. Luna, I'm confessing to you. Huh, he looked at me playfully. Be my little friend for life from now on. The heart literally crashed through the window and flew into the atmosphere. I'm completely frozen. He got up and lifted the curtains. The sunlight stabbed straight into the room, instantly dispelling all the darkness. He was bathed in leaping light and reached out his hand toward me. By the way, I forgot to mention yesterday that your mom is really cool. Let's go see her together when we get back home. I'm dizzy, thinking to myself, why is this person so out of line? You've just confessed your love, and you're thinking about meeting the parents. However, the warmth of the touch came from a steady stream in his palm. I was in a trance, choked up, unable to say no. All one can say is, good. He happily pulled me up into a hug in that moment. I made a prayerful wish to God in my heart. I hope the time with him lasts a little longer, a little more. Even if it's just a dream I had, I also hope to never wake up. I'm in love with River, but because work is too busy, we don't see each other much in the DRC. Most of the time, we meet in places of conflict. He ran wildly to save the wounded, and I'm desperately trying to shoot footage for the story. The hand that touches in a hurried brush is the only communication with each other, and the internet signal comes and goes. We often don't hear from each other for days. But then, they'll come flooding back into the phone at some point in a frenzy. It clanks and clanks and clanks in a jumbled order. It's as if you've also just traveled through gunfire, carrying a heavy load of misses, tenaciously delivering the heart's desire. But the situation in North Kivu is not encouraging. We had our first fight. It was the day a village near Goma was attacked. When we arrived at the scene, the armed men had not yet completely left. The security forces exchanged fire with them. We hurried back to the car and prepared to retreat. Instead, I saw River leap back down from the ambulance. At the edge of the firefight is a fallen villager. He carried the man back, his own hijacking bloodied by shrapnel cuts. I was angry and scared and had a huge fight with him, but he was unrelenting. I'm a doctor. Can't see death to save life. He was only shot in the leg at the time. He could still live. But if I hadn't saved him, he would have died under the firefight. I know he's right, and I know it's his calling to save lives. But I'm really scared. He came back covered in blood. It's impossible to tell whose it really is. I shivered and examined him for half a day before realizing that he had only suffered a superficial wound. Suddenly, I didn't want to argue anymore and hugged him and bawled. River, I don't want to lose anyone else. If something happens to you, what would I do? He's quiet. After a few moments, the counter hugged me, his voice husky. I'm sorry. I'll be careful in the future not to put my body at risk and let you worry." I buried myself in his chest and huffed. "You promise?" "Then we'll pull the hook." He took my hand and gesticulated. "We pinky promise. This promise will last for 100 years and must not be broken. Whoever breaks it will be a puppy." "I mustn't turn into a puppy. Or how will you introduce me when I meet your mom?" "Puppy boyfriend." I cracked up at his amusement, raising his hand. He pressed the pillow to his face. However, he lay looking motionless. I panicked again and lifted it off for fear of smothering him. He looked at me wryly, peacefully. Back seemed to say, "Look, it's not that easy to die." All I could do was stare at him. My eyes glazed over and suddenly teary-eyed again. The heart gradually sank. Anyone who knows what pulling the plug is just a psychological comfort. The adult field is the cruelest place of all. For the first time, I was acutely aware that every day I spent with River was precious. For no one can say which will come first, death or tomorrow. The wars became more and more frequent at the same time. Ebola has also begun to hit a country that is already riddled with holes. By spring, River was even busier. Because of the shortage of medical care, he began traveling between refugee camps and Ebola treatment centers. However, militants suddenly launched attacks on treatment centers in several cities. Many doctors began to have to give up their jobs and simply evacuate. But River won't leave. On the one hand, the situation in Goma is fairly settled. On the other hand, there are almost 100 patients at the center. If everyone left, they'd just be lying in a hospital bed, waiting to die. He and 4 other doctors stayed behind to improvise. But it did not take long for armed elements to take over the outskirts of Goma. Blocking access roads were trapped. In this case, River sent me a message out of the blue: "Send me to the treatment center." He was incoherent, but I had a bad feeling about it. We donned our protective suits and entered the medical waste disposal area. In a room that was vacated, I met over a dozen Hutu children. They were escaping from the mountains. The oldest is only 12. Clothes were ragged and covered with wounds that had become infected. I couldn't believe my eyes, because the armed men who occupy the suburbs are of Tutsi origin. They have a blood feud with the Hutus. If this group of children is found, the entire treatment center could be destroyed. I feel devastated. River, are you out of your mind? Do you remember what MSF is all about? He was not supposed to get directly involved in a war conflict so that he could maximize his ability to help others. But he just hung his head. "I know this is dangerous, so I just wanted to ask you if you could contact any organization that could take them in." "But how are you going to get them out of Goma with so many people? It's full of inspectors out there." River speaks fast. "They're small enough to wear protective suits and get into garbage cans containing medical waste. The haulers come every 3 days, and no one will open these garbage cans. Just make sure we have someone to receive them afterward, and we can save them." I was shaken to the spot by his audacious plan. He clenched his fists. "Luna, I'm a human being first, then a doctor, and finally MSF. There's no way I'm throwing them out to die. The pain in my head was excruciating. Reason and sense are wrestling madly. And those kids watched us argue violently. Both showed a look of despair. The youngest children, huddled close together, their fingers intertwined as if waiting for their fate to be finally pronounced. I went soft, almost instantly. They did their best to escape from hell. We can't resend them back again. Taking a few deep breaths, I calmed down. I'll help you. But I'm not just going to help you contact the receivers. I'm going to be here to hand deliver them all. River froze and immediately balked. No way. It's dangerous. So I'll let you face the danger alone. If you don't agree, I'll go out right now and tell them there are Hutu children hiding here. He gritted his teeth. I never should have looked for you. It's too late. You've got me involved. River got mad at herself and turned her head away from talking to me. I sighed and wrapped my arms around his neck, forcing him to look at me. At least worst case scenario, we can die together. He was immediately furious. Blah, blah, blah. Nonsense. This will never happen through the transparent mask. I touched his face. Well, sure. After all, you promised me we'd go back to see Mom. Needless to say, River's plan was almost seamless. No one would want to touch the medical waste of those Ebola patients, much less that there was someone hiding inside. We can, at a time, transport 2 children. The transport trucks would stop once on the road in the middle of the journey, and a member of a humanitarian organization would move the children. Half a month later, only the last 2 children of that group were left. They are the oldest and a brother and sister. The brother's name is Leo, and the sister's name is Mary. River was in a good mood the day the transport truck was coming to pick them up. He said to me once again, "Thank you, Luna." I didn't respond. I just gripped his hand harder. We have almost seen the victory, even celebrated early for it. 2 children perform the Hutu folk dance Igambira for us. River cooked them a meal that was nothing short of scrumptious, and I took a lot of pictures of them. When night falls, they began to put on their protective suits. Mary handed me a marker and asked, "Can you guys write your names on it?" River and I were a little surprised, but signed our names anyway. I thought about it and added, "I hope you grow up well." River wrote, "I hope you are able to reunite with your families." I wrote again, "I hope the war will end soon." River also wrote, "I hope we will meet again in the future." We wrote blessings all over our protective clothing. By the end of the writing, everyone was in tears. They jumped into our arms. The voice came muffled from under the protective suit. "We will always and forever remember you. Thank you, guys. You are our big heroes." In the middle of the night, the transport truck drove into the center. We loaded the kids into the dumpster, as usual. Send it to the van. However, just after everything was done, gunshots were heard in the center hall. River and I blushed and ran wildly. The armed men broke in and said they had received information that someone here was harboring Hutu children. River went ahead and intervened. Cooperate with their searches without being condescending. I watched as the men viciously kicked in doors and rummaged through every corner of the room. So nervous, I almost threw up. They rummaged around and found nothing, threatened us a few times, and was about to leave. Suddenly, someone shouted a greeting at the door, saying he had seen the transport truck that had just left. The men immediately burst into profanity, and all rushed out. The last armed man to leave yelled and threw a grenade angrily down the hall. A moment of life and death. Everything in the scene pulled into slow motion in my eyes. I could see the bomb falling slowly along a parabola, could see the looks of horror on the other doctors' faces as they lost control, could see River darting toward me with a scowl on his face moments before the explosion. He pinned me down and shielded me, covered my ear with his hand. Immediately afterward, time and space fall into place. It was like I'd been slapped hard on the ground by a huge, rolling hand. Wow spewed out a mouthful of blood, and his internal organs shifted. Smoke rolled and rose around them, and it was hard to see anything. There was a wet liquid running down his face when I touched it. My entire palm was covered in blood. River was blown off his feet, lying across the floor not far from me. I tried to get up, but realized I couldn't even stand. All that could be done was to stumble over to him on his knees and try his breathing with trembling hands. Luckily, he's not dead. Another gunshot came from somewhere. I desperately tried to carry him on my back, start running outward. But there are people with guns on their backs everywhere. All I could do was turn immediately and go deeper into the woods. After running for I don't know how long, my legs gradually became numb to the point of losing consciousness. I gradually became unsupportable and flopped to the ground. River woke up at that point as well. He struggled to get up to help me, but couldn't move his body. One can only say weakly, "Luna, you go first." I couldn't stop whimpering and got up again in a fit of rage. I don't want it to go together. He grabbed my ankle. You go ahead and find someone to save me. 2 people can't get away. I broke down and cried. River, we pulled the hook. You are not allowed to lie to me if you die. I won't let you go even as a ghost. He chuckled lowly. Again, he choked on the blood in his mouth and coughed. Cough, cough. Well, I won't lie to you. Deceitful. It's a puppy. I struggled to get up and helped him to sit down by the tree, and the tears kept flowing. He squeezed my hand gently. Come on. You won't let me die, will you? I frantically wiped my eyes. You must wait for me. I'll come back to save you. You're going to be fine. He smiled and waved at me. Good. I turned around, ready to continue my escape. The next second, there was a thunderous gunshot from behind him. I was pummeled to the ground. A huge force hit my shoulder, and the sharp pain made my breathing stop. Shot. I turned my face in horror, saw River fall on top of me. 6 on his chest. There was a penetrating wound that had completely stained his white coat red, and blood was gushing out of his mouth in a frenzy. The mind goes blank, not caring about my injuries. I pushed down the pain and rolled over. River, River. I pressed futilely on his wound, hexed, stop the bleeding, to stop the bleeding first. But he took my hand gently. A simple gesture, but one that seemed to take all of his strength. He said vaguely, right, no. Up, I love you. in your next life, be my little friend again." In his eyes, a complicated light mingled. There was dismay, pity, and relief finally. It all dimmed. The hand holding mine slid weakly aside. I froze. A great sense of disorientation and fear struck. The heart felt like it was on fire. I wowed and spit out another huge mouthful of blood. Vision began to blur, and cold sweat poured out like crazy. The adrenaline was wearing off as well, and the sharp pain in my shoulder was making me bleary-eyed. I'm still trying to catch him, extreme fear of sudden death. The mouth called out, "Jai, Cheng." However, the body is on the verge of breaking. I fell back and blacked out when I woke up again. The faint smell of antiseptic water lingered on the tip of my nose. I have been transferred to a hospital in the country. The doctor said I was in ICU for 2 full weeks, severe contusion of internal organs, and shot in the shoulder. But there is a blessing in misfortune. There was no ruptured spleen, and the bullet did not cause a penetrating wound. The blood loss wasn't too bad, which is why I waited until the peacekeepers came to the rescue. I'm well aware of that, and that's because River got in my way twice. He saved my life. I asked everyone I could contact about his whereabouts, but they all told me that it was too chaotic to find River's body. And because of the rising number of casualties, Médecins Sans Frontières has suspended its program in North Kivu. No one can help me find him anymore. And just like that, River disappeared. I wake up night after night screaming and having panic attacks. The image of him before he died kept flashing back in his mind. My doctor diagnosed me with PTSD. I started taking pills, doing counseling, and even drinking, but none of it worked. Everyone advised me to try to live a new life, not to dwell on the past, and to let myself out. But how can? Walk out, he died for me. The thought lingered constant, makes me hate myself for being alive, and why it wasn't me who died. Hating why the world couldn't give him a good ending. I've been up on the rooftop countless times trying to chase him away, only to yank himself back in at the last minute. This is the life that River gave everything to save. I lost my license to give up a long time ago. I took 6 months of sick leave upon returning to the station. Press couldn't face all those cameras and photos anymore, and applied for a transfer to a behind-the-scenes position. However, as time passed, I was still as lifeless as the walking dead. My coworkers couldn't stand to watch and wanted me to meet some new people, so they dragged me on a blind date. I was uninterested and just wanted to deal with a couple sentences and leave. But that's when I met Clyde. Upon seeing the face that mirrored River's, I'm stunned. It took almost all his strength. It's the only way to not cry on the spot. Then I learned he's the brother River mentioned, finding a stand-in for this kind of thing. At first, it does feel comforting. How beautifully enticing those ordinary days are. He gets off work late, so I can make dinner and wait for him to come home on our days off. We can nestle on the couch and watch movies together. Every night that I wake up with a nightmare, seeing him still lying quietly beside me allows me to drop off into a deep sleep again. It's everything River, and I never could have. I was so engrossed in it. I couldn't help myself, almost even fooled myself. Just think of it as him, living out his life in peace. How great is that, however? Dreams have to wake up one day. They are not alone, after all. How could River give away her camera when she was going home with me to see her mom? He'd rather take his life to protect me. So how could he let others bully me wantonly? How could he see me as a weak, uninformed woman stuck in a family? When he said he found his meaning in me, I regret it. His body is still cold, and I robbed escapism and lived a life of self-delusion with his shadow. How could I do this to him? So I had to leave, even knowing that I might not be ready to face everything. But I should go to him. I should have been there a long time ago. I'm going to go back and get him myself. Re-entry into the Gomer refugee camps. I met River's co-workers today. MSF has returned. His former partner, Adam, is now promoted to coordinator of the entire Goma program. The first time we saw each other, tears flowed before a word was spoken. After a half hour of hugging and crying, I told him I was back looking for River. He took me to the warehouse. Surprisingly, there are some of River's relics in there. There was a rush to evacuate, and a lot of things weren't organized. In that box, there was a cardboard picture, a packet of flower seeds, a set of keys, several medical books, a stethoscope. It's all bits and pieces. Yet it is relevant to him. It was like I was 3 years ago again. Push open the door. That leads to his dorm room one afternoon. Saw him sitting in a chair, reading a book, spinning the pen in his hand. Seeing me with a smile on her brow, she said, "There you are." Adam was also a little tentative. They should have been disposed of a long time ago as well. But I thought that you might come back one day to collect a coffin for him, so I kept them. I didn't think it really weighted. I took it solemnly. Adam, thank you. I'm the one who's late. After that, I told him I still wanted to find out what happened to the group of kids back then. He promised to keep an eye out for me. But after all these years, let me not get my hopes up. After everything was done, I went back to my dorm, found a message from a coworker. They said Clyde came to see me. On the day of the wedding, I didn't show up. His parents were furious. He's been looking all over for me. It wasn't until I asked a coworker that I learned I had come to the DRC. He didn't want to believe it, made a scene at the TV station, and was almost taken away by the police. I sighed. Can't figure it out. What does it matter to him where I am if he has another lover? But not wanting to embarrass my coworkers any further, I dialed up a video for Clyde. The second I picked up, my breath hitched. The camera shows his entire body puffed up. The light around them was dim and smoky. On the floor, lying all over the place, were bottles of alcohol. Luna, is it really you? He stared at me blankly and rubbed his eyes several times repeatedly. You're good, he snorted suddenly, burying himself in his palm. You'd really gamble on running off to Africa just for something Nina said. Are you sick? I was instantly enraged and felt that there was something really wrong with myself for contacting him. Was about to hang up. He was seen dropping large drops of liquid from the cracks of his fingers. How can you joke with your own life? How could you let me worry about you so much? I suddenly felt ridiculous. You're worried about me. The beginning of our relationship was you using me to cope with my parents, and me using you as a stand-in for comfort. Without an ounce of truth, he interrupted me with a snarl. Fuck the lack of truth. You know that I went out to look for Nina on the day of the gathering, but I was thinking about you the whole time. I was worried about how you were going to get back after drinking so much. Your camera broke. I ran around the city's camera stores to find it for you, and they all said it was too old and didn't have it. I asked my friends abroad to help me again, and when I found it, I flew there personally and got it back for you. When you said you disappeared. They said you went to the DRC. I Googled the country and panicked until I couldn't sleep at night. You made me fall in love with you, and then you left me behind. How do you do that? He was red-eyed. That look is almost like a stray dog on the doorstep. Come back, okay? He pulled out the ring that I had thrown away, and his tone was humble. The wedding date can be booked again. I will only marry you. We looked at each other for a long time. In the end, I laughed over my shoulder. Clyde, what's all this talk about love when you've never even really known me? Who is Nina? And who are you to make me gamble? I only came back because the people I love are here. His pupils constricted as he painfully swept everything off the table. Who is he? Who the hell is he? I hung up the video coldly. You don't have to know. I'm back in journalism. After 3 years, the situation in the DRC is even worse than before. The areas under the control of the militants have expanded to unprecedented levels. Food crises, cholera epidemics, sexual violence, and kidnappings abound. It was as if this place had become a God-forsaken place, witnessing everything like hell every day. I would think, is there really any point to what we're doing for me? It's like I'm just documenting the cycle of tragedy. The world sees the suffering here. But then what? And for MSF, are there life-saving treatments perpetuating hope or prolonging suffering? No one can say whether it is fortunate or unfortunate to live in such a place. A few months later, Adam told me that he had found 5 of those kids. Among them were Leo and Mary. They managed to escape that day, and has since contacted relatives, and is now living with relatives in Kisangani. The news was energizing. I flew to meet them. The car had just pulled up to the place we'd agreed on. Mary had then darted out. She jumped into my arms, teary-eyed, "Glisten, you're finally here." She has grown much taller and is emerging as a big girl. Anxiously, he looked into the car and asked me, "Where's the doctor? Why didn't he come along?" I gave a beat. "He's too busy." Back, Mary immediately twisted her fingers. Has something happened to him? Children who have experienced death are extra sensitive to such ambiguous words. I shook my head with certainty. No, he's fine. I'll show you. I flipped through my phone, only to realize that I don't have a picture of River, because I was afraid to look at them. I sealed them all into my computer when I returned home. At the end of the rummage, all I could find was a picture of Clyde. He was wearing a white coat and was reading his chart in the dim, warm light of a desk lamp. and river really seems like it. Mary saw the picture, finally believed it, and jumped for joy, pulling her brother. He said, "I'm going to be a doctor someday." Several other children chimed in, "Me too. I want to heal people." I touched their heads and asked the boy who had been silent, "What about Leo? What do you want to do later?" Leo glanced at the camera hanging from my chest, a little embarrassed. "I want to be a journalist." I froze. "I want to be like you and show the world those who are going through trials and tribulations. If they can be seen, maybe someone will be willing to lend a hand." Fighting the urge to cry, I stirred them both into my arms. If River were still around, he'd be happy. The seeds we unintentionally planted are slowly sprouting. Before I left, I gave Leo my card player and gave Mary and the other kids the stethoscope and books River left behind. Their cheeks were red with excitement until the car drove away, all still standing on the side of the road, desperately waving their hands and smiling broadly. I guess maybe there's still a point to it. Individuals are too small to shake the status quo, but it can ignite anticipation of the future for other individuals. These children are in the gutter, but still look forward to lifting a bright future with their scars. Like River said, there is expectation and there is hope. A few more months passed. My plan to find River's remains came to nothing. I've been to those woods many times, but it was nighttime, and I had no idea which direction I was actually running in. In the end, one has to give up. I started organizing photos from the past, documented River's story piece by piece on my Twitter feed. Many of the details are blurred after 3 years. It was only supposed to be a record made in fear that I would forget more as time passed. But I didn't expect the article to explode. A flood of messages wanting to know more about his story. It has been said, the old Chinese people have the gardening gene engraved in their bones, and they can make a garden anywhere. Some of his former patients recognized him. Dr. Jai was really nice. My mom was already a little confused when she got sick, but he was never impatient whenever he talked to her. He also performed magic tricks for my daughter and was scolded severely by their director, who thought he was playing cards. I pieced together from those comments what he looked like in the days before we met. It wasn't long before I got a video from Clyde. He sent me a screenshot of my tweet and asked, "Is that you?" I graciously admitted, "Yes." He shuddered, his eyes bitter. "So what you're talking about is my brother." "Exactly. I should have seen this coming. I should have thought of that. No wonder you always look at my face like that. I thought you really loved me." He hung his head in dismay. Now good by good. I haven't written the backstory yet, so he doesn't know. I said coldly, "He's not good. He died 3 years ago." The phone slipped out of Clyde's hand. It hit the ground hard. It took half a day before the image was restored with a shudder. He was close to breaking down. "He's dead. Why don't I know? Why didn't you tell me? What do you think?" I sneered. "Did any of your family, in all those years, ever care about him?" Clyde shuddered violently, too weak to meet my eyes. When I first met Clyde's parents, I tried to ask if he had any more siblings. His parents waved their hands dismissively. "No, Clyde said. "There used to be one, but you just pretend he's dead." I asked what he meant by that. He perversely slammed the bowl and warned me. No mention of him in this house. He hated River, hated him for running away from the family and turning him into a new victim. His parents hate River even more, hating that he was born to them and can't be manipulated. So how could I tell them? I raised my head. Don't shed your crocodile tears. How do you think he got to a place like this? It's all because you guys forced it. Clyde hung up the phone hastily. After a few days, Clyde's parents approached me. They say Clyde is missing. I realized that Clyde had rushed home that day and trashed the house. He said it was all his parents' fault. If it wasn't for his parents forcing River, he wouldn't have run away to the DRC. He wouldn't have met me, and he wouldn't have died. And he wouldn't have been so repressed that he thought he was in love with Maverick Nina and missed me. All of this in between. One thing leads to another. No solution. After that, he handed in his resignation to the hospital and disappeared. 2 old men over 100 years old wailed and howled almost to the point of breaking. How can you blame us for this? Is it wrong for us as parents to want our sons to honor their ancestors? I told him to stay in the hospital, but he didn't listen, and now he's gone. It's all his own fault, isn't it? How can Clyde get upset with us over something like this? We're his parents anyways. We beg you, let him come back. We've already lost one son. We can't lose the other one too. I couldn't stand it and dropped the phone. Roll. You don't deserve to be parents at all. I'm in a bad mood. Round and round it went, back to the woods. After finding a large tree and sitting down, I looked at the dappled patches of light on the ground, clutching his knees. Although River only opened up to me that one time, yet I can guess how aggravated he used to be at home. The emergency contact he filled out with Medicines Sans Frontières was his partner at first. Then it became me. He didn't even want his family to know anything had happened. But out of that rags to riches family grew such a gentle, kind, unselfish man as he was. Thinking like that made me a little sad again. A gust of wind blew. Something hard fell out of the tree and hit me straight in the head. I wailed and hissed. Pick something up and look at it. That's a nameplate. Many people who worked and lived in war zones carried this for easy identification in the event of an unexpected death. I thought it was left behind by some soldier, but turn it over to the front, and it's inscribed, River. I popped up instantly, rubbing the words on it over and over again. Why is his nameplate here? Look around. I realized that the tree I had my back against was a little different than the others. It is much taller than the other trees and has wavy, dark green leaves, and the soil at the roots is dark in color. Watch and see, it suddenly dawned on me. Back, I frantically plowed my hands into the dirt, plucked his fingernails to the point where they were stuffed with dirt and blood. As he plowed, a white bone was exposed. At that moment, I bawled my eyes out. I got the tools, turned up the remains of those entangled in the roots, in the dirt. There were pieces of the white coat he was wearing that day. It's River. I found him. I finally found him when he died. He was probably buried hastily on the spot, and that nameplate was coincidentally brought back to life by a large tree wrapped in growth. Until today, I sat under a tree it fell off. It's like he saw me feeling sorry for him. It's like he saw me feeling sorry for him. So popped me with a brain crash. Say, be happy and don't get angry at people who don't deserve it. Those things are in the past, I said in a shaky voice, clutching his head tightly. Okay, go home. We're going home. I applied for a leave of absence and brought his ashes back home and buried them next to my mom, since his real family doesn't want him. Then I'll be his family. The day of the burial, I met Clyde. He had lost a lot of weight and was a bit shapeless, 2 bunches of white chrysanthemums in her hand. Put it on my mom and River's grave. He said he figured it all out. He showed me an apology video from a friend's circle. It's from Nina. Apologize to me and anyone else she deceived. She said she hadn't traveled around the world at all and had stayed in Beijing the whole time because she felt that such a persona would keep Clyde in her thoughts. That's why it fooled everyone. And the outbursts against me were due to jealousy that I was actually marrying Clyde. After watching the video, Clyde called Nina in front of me. She said in a mournful tone, "Ah, King, I've apologized, as you said. I've been scolded to death, so it's time for you to forgive me. And you said you'd marry me, and you're really going to honor that, aren't you?" Clyde said coldly. "No, I won't marry you. You lied to me, and I lied to you. We don't owe each other anything. Make you apologize just because you hurt Luna from now on. Let's never see each other again." He hung up, pulled the plug, and apologized. "I'm sorry about the camera. I didn't know it was your mom's belongings." I shook my head. "You don't have to apologize, because I won't forgive you. What good is a feeble apology when irreparable damage has already been done?" He looked grim and added, "I'm sorry for my brother too. He contacted me many times when he first got out, but I stood him up every time and scolded him. I knew in my heart that it wasn't his fault that Mom and Dad forced me to break up with Nina. But I didn't have the courage to run away, and I was jealous of him." He stared blankly at River's tombstone. "If I hadn't been such a coward and followed him in the first place, isn't it still possible to meet you together and at least level the playing field with him?" I just blandly said, "There are no pills of regret in the world, and there's no point in assuming. I love River, that's all." He stood up and sighed softly. "Maybe in the future, I'll do MSF too. I wanted to be close to you and make up for it." I frowned, was going to say, "Whatever, it's his choice anyway." But then it suddenly occurred to me. Someone had said that his brother didn't seem to want to be a doctor. He's thinking of you and wants you to think about what kind of person you really want to be. Stop making yourself regret it." Clyde was baffled, as if caught up in memories of days gone by. His eyes reddened completely. I picked up the 2 bunches of flowers, neither of them like white chrysanthemums. "So don't send them in the future," tossing the flowers back to Clyde. I turned to leave. We were like 2 boats swept up in a flood. After having briefly sailed in the same direction, each with its own twists and turns, split the head towards the ends. as I walked out of the cemetery. I saw an unexpected person won my dad. But when I think about it, it makes sense to me. Clyde would have gone to him to find out it was my mom's camera. So he knows I'm back too. He's a little old, hunched over, shivering slightly in the wind. I was asked somewhat curtly, "Have you eaten?" I'll get right to the point. "Say, what do you want from me?" He rubbed his hands together uneasily. "Can you please come home? You're big. Don't come back later. I haven't been doing what you asked me to do, staying well out of the house. And now, why do you want me to come home again?" "Your sister is sick, cancer." A momentary surprise. "There's nothing I can do. Everything in the house that can be sold has been sold. And you're her sister. Can you help her?" He had a sad face. "I know you resent me, but in the beginning, it wasn't me who wanted to kick you out. You are my daughter. How can I give up? I have bitter feelings." "I know." He stared at me blankly. "The day I got my acceptance letter, I was so happy. I can finally follow in my mom's footsteps and go into journalism and become a reporter." I rushed home to tell my dad about the happy event. Instead, he heard him and his aunt arguing in the kitchen. "In a few years, when Wen will be going to college too, so our family won't be able to afford her. You've raised her to adulthood. Isn't that enough kindness, Nai Shiwen? Think about it. This family has her but not me, me but not her." I carefully reclosed the door again, ran down the street, and sat alone all afternoon. All summer long, I was on tenterhooks, waiting for that final answer. By the time I got to the report, my heart finally dropped, also smashed completely. You didn't want the home you'd managed to rebuild to fall apart again, so you chose to sacrifice me. Couldn't give it up anymore, but still got rid of me. He tried to say something else, but I interrupted him. "I haven't resented you. I understand. It's just that, from your daughter's point of view, you're not a very bad dad, but you're not a passable one either." I picked up my cell phone and transferred him $300,000. He has made some payments to my card off and on over the years. I saved it all to pay him back sometime. I paid back the money you gave me for the rest. Think of it as me returning the favor of your upbringing. In the future, don't come back to me." After leaving the restaurant, I suddenly felt an overwhelming sense of relief. One by one, all those burdens that had been weighing on my heart have dissipated. I put my foot down and went to the florist, where River had bought birds of paradise for her mom. The shopkeeper recognized me, but the flower store was almost empty. She was moving the vacant planters into the van. I asked, "Where is this moving to?" She smiled, "Not driving. I want to do something else." I stayed for a split second. "That's pretty good too." She wrapped up a bouquet for me with the leftover lily of the valley, hyacinths and olive branches from the store. "May we all embrace our new lives." We exchanged a hug. Yippee-ki-yay on the way home. The colorful sunset is like a cloud, and the evening light should be golden. I stopped and admired it for a while. Suddenly, I got a call from the station manager. The tone on the other side was a little anxious. "Nai, your vacation may have to end early." What happened? He sent me a news article. The Lebanese-Israeli conflict escalated with pager explosions in various parts of Lebanon. The station thinks you're more experienced. I interrupted him. I'll go. Pulling the nameplate necklace with River's name engraved on it from his collar. I kissed it gently. I don't think we'll get any other answer, because where the smoke of war rises must be where we run to. We will always want everyone in this world. No matter how deep the darkness is, there is always starlight to be found. Postscript 1 Luna's DRC diary is finished on the web. Countless netizens shed tears over River's ending. They spontaneously traveled to the cemetery to pay their condolences for River. Even his parents, who never recognized the son in the past, have made appearances in the media to tell what a kind and selfless person he is. But soon some netizens picked up on what they did in the past. They were immediately reviled by the crowd. Anonymous wreaths sent to them littered the building. They ended up moving out in the dead of night in disarray. Not knowing where they went, To River was posthumously awarded the Nansen Refugee Award by the UNHCR in recognition of his outstanding contribution to the protection and assistance of refugees. 3 Clyde did not enter Doctors Without Borders. He took over the flower store next to that cemetery. Luna's words that day reminded him of the days when he was a kid playing in the yard with his brother in the mud. At that time, my brother asked him what he wanted to do in the future. He said he wanted to open a big flower store. It's just that this memory has since been lost in time. Every year, no matter how busy she is with work, Luna takes the time to visit the cemetery and pay her respects to her mother and River. It was the only day he could meet her again. At other moments, he could only watch as she traveled throughout the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and other war-torn places. He counted the days religiously. I look forward to watching every meeting with her, although Luna doesn't care about him at all anymore. But he felt that it was enough that he would see her again. 4. Nina's social embarrassment. Even close friends from the past have cut off contact with her. Thinks she's full of lies and has a bad heart. She was desperate and found Clyde, only to realize that Luna had long been the only one left in the other's eyes. She's turned herself into a complete buffoon. 5. Luna's stepsister died 2 years later after a long illness. Her stepmother cost her her home, and now she's lost her daughter. She is divorced from Luna's father. Nai Shiwen's family is once again torn apart. Only this time, he didn't even have a daughter by his side. It wasn't long before he passed away. 6. Luna has been sponsoring the group of kids they saved in the end. Jean and Marie really did become a reporter and a doctor. Many years later, Luna won the Pulitzer Prize for journalism. In delivering his acceptance speech, she said, "If you can't stop the war, be the eyes of the world by telling the truth about it."